in industry, you're basically part of a pack. You're working not solo, you're working within a team. Now, when you get that sort of team mentality, you're very frightened to be outside the pack. You want to have this sort of conscious connection with them, which basically means you don't suggest things. But if you suggest things, you get shot down, you put yourself at risk. Companies work on economics. If it hasn't got any benefit, then it's not going to happen. And nobody wants to make a decision. Everyone likes things constant, constant days. They've got technologies or food safety systems in place. They don't want to change them.
Welcome to the Feed Science Podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. I am Carlos Campabadal from Kansas State University, dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the feed science industry. Get ready to expand your knowledge and stay ahead with today's episode. So today it is a great pleasure to me to have Dr. Keith Warriner, who is a professor in food science at the University of Guelph. Dr. Warriner, welcome to the Feed Science Podcast. It is a great pleasure having you. I know that today we'll cover great topics that will help our audience understand a lot of the challenges of transition of research to commercial practice. So with that, welcome, Dr. Warriner. As an introduction, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, or our audience can learn about a little bit about you?
Oh, thanks, Carlos, for the inviting me back again. So, as you rightly said, I actually started life as a chef, which seems a bit odd because I only spent about 4 years being a chef, but it seems to haunt me even now, even though I'm quite aged. So, obviously, when I was at school, I didn't really know what to do. So I was doing what my best friend was going to do, and he wanted to be a chef. So I went along. And during those courses, it was a case of you're much better at theory than the actual practical element to it. And I think that really taught me saying, I should go to food science, shouldn't I? So I went to food science, went to the University of Nottingham to do a degree in food science. And then I actually pivoted to do microbial physiology, which was in its dying days at that time, because everybody was starting to get on the molecular bandwagon. But I went to University of Aberystwyth, did physiology, and then I pivoted again to go to work at the University of Manchester to work on biosensors. And then I went back to the University of Nottingham to do food science. Then in 2002, I came over to the University of Guelph in the Department of Food Science, where I established a research group in food safety, primarily food microbiology. And right from the get-go, it was always applied research. It's always research for a purpose rather than just fundamental research. And I've worked with industry a lot, and we've developed innovations and interventions and things like that have reached commercial reality in certain cases. And I also am asked to comment on food safety issues, so things like pistachio nuts and salmonella. So it's quite a varied job.
Well, this is great, and it just seems that you had a very interesting career, and I do appreciate the chef, so you understand the preparation of foods and then apply it with the science, which being a chef is also has some science into it, of course, but now from the different perspective of it, and very, very interesting, and I know that our audience will take that. And as a matter of comment, my wife actually started the same in food science. She did culinology. Then she did a master's and PhD in food safety, and food microbiology, and so it's very, very important topics, and it's a big thing overall. So let's start talking a little bit about it. As you seem, you have done a different path in your career. You have seen different things and focus always in the kind of like the food science, microbiology realm. But let's talk a little bit about the challenges of you come with an idea on the research, you get the funding, get the students, you do your work, and then that transition to the commercial practice, which is a challenge to be there with the industry. Let's start talking a little bit about that. Let's say about the challenges, or maybe just we'll go from the start. What do you do first when you're trying to think about a research project, and then we go about that and all the way to the commercial practice and talking about challenges and things like that.
Oh, for sure. When I started research, I would say seriously about 1995 after my PhD, it was a very different sort of area. It basically, you had an idea of something and you could submit a grant application, and it could be the wildest thing ever. You could be saying, in this case, it was to do with fresh produce and food safety. Back in the 90s, people thought, well, no, all the food-borne illness comes from meat and dairy, but they were always open to it. So we actually got into fresh produce safety fairly early on, just to establish that pathogens can be internalized and things like that. And when I came over to Canada, it was slightly different. It was very orientated to solving a specific issue. And I've known over the years that this has become more pronounced in that it's not so much this sort of spark of an idea you have. It's literally looking to see what the problems are with industry and then addressing them directly, because they feel it's that direct route to solve a problem for industry. That's the best way of using research. And what I've noticed is that the fundamental research, these crazy ideas you have, don't tend to get funded these days. So it's a very different sort of environment. It's not like in the good old days where you would discover penicillin and things like this. But anyhow, to the point is that certainly innovation has suffered, I guess, to do with that, because you're kind of looking at industry to say, well, what's your problem? And with industry, they'll say what the problems are, but they're very short sort of term problems rather than long term. But anyhow, so you look for the inspiration, say, what is the problem? And in this case, it was to do with fresh produce, saying, well, we need a better way of decontaminating fresh produce. So we devised this crazy idea of using hydroxy radicals, which previously had been used for water treatment and carton sterilization, but nobody thought, well, why don't we do it on food? So I always think if I came with that same idea right now, whether it would be accepted, because they say you're too crazy to do it. But anyway, in the 2000s, it was accepted, and we started this project, and the results were great. We got all these reductions on produce like lettuce, cauliflower, onion, you name it. And then we published papers, we got graduated students, and I thought, this is it, it's going to be commercialized. But it wasn't. Basically, everything went quiet. The industry weren't that interested in it, saying, we wash, so it doesn't matter. So jump forward 10 years, and there was a candy apple outbreak linked to California apples. It was a big listeria outbreak. But the point is that it caused fairly widespread illness and some deaths. And retailers got really scared of it. And they basically said, no more candy apples ever. We don't want to take the risk. Anyhow, so in Niagara, there was this candy apple producer who just basically invested in millions of dollars in making a new facility to make candy apples. And overnight, the market went. Fortunately, he was near what we call Vineland, and there was someone called Kim Wright who worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, remembered this project 10 years back, what we had done. And from that point, they said, I'll go and talk to this scientist at University of Guelph. He'll have this treatment. Anyhow, long story short, he took that technology. We solved the apple issue. We could decontaminate listeria or apples on listeria on apples. His market blew up because he was the only one applying the technology. And he established a company called CleanWorks, which basically since about 8 years now have got into all kinds of things, including decontaminating feed. But, when we talk about the challenges of going from research to industry, we tried this in 2000 and we got nowhere. It's only when we had what I call this transitional champion that it actually went somewhere. And I think this sort of funding sort of structure they have where you've got a university or research institute just jumps into the commercialization. There's a long road between those two, even though people think, oh, no, you just open your own business. All fraught with danger, but it's very challenging to get to that point of commercialization.
Very interesting because I do agree. I mean, when you have a scientific mind, there's always that innovation. Like you put the example of penicillin. And but also like you said, now these days, including myself, we try to do research projects that align better to solve problems for the industry, which I think is good too. But you might lose other innovation there. And I put the example of the National Space Agency here in the United States, NASA, that a lot of great things have come out of there for our day to day, like Velcro and other things. And that's a professor during my PhD taught me that. It's like, well, there was innovation there to solve issues because we're trying to go to space. So very interested in that. So going to the transition, going from academic research to industry and commercialization, um, think a little bit of that from that term. What will be the difference between, from your perspective, between academic and industry research? And before we go into that, just to remind our audience, if they have any questions, please put it in the comments, and we'll make sure to get it to Dr. Warriner. So in case to get back to any particular questions. So going back, in your opinion, what will be the difference between academic and industry focused research?
No, that's a very good question, because what funding bodies tend to do these days, both in Canada and the US, is to try and make this sort of marriage between industry and academia. But I always have this sort of saying, is that academics are from Venus, industry is from Mars. And I always say, well, academics are like cats, and I should be careful. Industry are like dogs. And there's a reason for that. I like dogs, I like dogs. So in industry, you're basically part of a pack. You're working not solo, you're working within a team. Now, when you get that sort of team mentality, you're very frightened to be outside the pack. You want to have this sort of conscious connection with them, which basically means you don't suggest things. But if you suggest things, you get shot down, you put yourself at risk. Companies work on economics. If it hasn't got any benefit, then it's not going to happen. And nobody wants to make a decision. Everyone likes things constant, constant days. They've got technologies or food safety systems in place. They don't want to change them. And when they get problems, it's usually because something's happened where it's out of normality. So in a lot of ways, I look at industry like government, as in they like constant, don't like change. Now we go to academics, and academics basically have different sort of motivations. So the first thing about being a faculty member, and I think it's universal, though I'm just talking to myself, you're on your own from day one. I know people say, well, you got mentorship and that, but basically you fall or you rise based on your own things. And they get a bit selfish and solitary. So they'll do collaborations when it suits them. Mm-hmm. But it's a very awkward marriage, because I've noticed certain collaborations you have, if it's not their idea, they don't buy into it. It's just that I'm collaborating. So that's the first thing. They're very solitary creatures. And their motivation or their metrics is to be inventive. They've got to get papers out. They've got to get grants. They've got to get students out. And anything that falls outside that scope, like extension, and in the US, they're very good at extension. Mm-hmm. Here in Canada, it's almost like take it or leave it, even though I do a lot of extension. So you try to get this marriage of the two things, whereas university academics work in years. Say, oh, we've got a 5-year project. Industry don't want to know that. They want to know now. We want it now. Yeah. So there's that aspect. And the other aspect is that when you produce something innovative, which is, like I say, it's fairly rare these days, but it's so linked to industry, even those grants that propose that, this is blue sky research. Yeah, they want sure bets. That's the thing. But anyway, it's what it is. Who owns it? And you get some academics who really go out on a limb and say, I'm going to start my own business and I'm going to patent everything. And they soon realize saying, starting your own business is very difficult because you're competing against these other companies. And so I always say, unless there's some reason to keep it, give all the IP to industry. And I think we learned that fairly early on. Because IP, especially in my field, which is basically technology innovations, you need the infrastructure, you need the manufacturing, the marketing, and there's no way universities could do that. So you need that, but you need sort of a confidence. And referring back to the hydroxy radical process, I think if it wasn't for the fact that we did this fundamental research back in the 2000s, it would never have caught off, because I don't think the industrial partner would have waited years and years to get the candy apples on the market again. So this is, I suppose, the point I'm trying to make, is that certainly we should do these innovative, fundamental, wild ideas. Yeah, 99% will fail. But then you've got that in the book. So when it comes to a problem later on in life, it can be solved. And yeah, I'm reminded about the discovery of penicillin, actually, thinking about it. It was a classic case. Alexander Fleming, he discovered the penicillin, but it was only 10 years after that someone said, I think we should use this as a drug. So without his work, then, there would have been started from scratch anyway, to the point then. So there is this sort of big gap between them, and it all comes down to the fact is that, are we doing research the right way these days, working in these silos? And why don't we go back to the good old pandemic days, where for the first time was a collective, everybody working on the same page to solve a common problem? And my belief is that the way research is going is definitely a fact that, this perish or publish is, peer review papers. I think that's going to be a thing of the past, to be honest. It's all this, how do we efficiently use this expertise, these ideas to industry? But at the moment, it's not quite like that. It's sort of a marriage of cats and dogs, I suppose the word is.
That's a very good analogy. I never thought it from that perspective of cats and dogs, but it's a very interesting term of that. And for our audience, please like us, give us a thumbs up for today's podcast. So, Dr. Warriner, so our audience can understand a little bit more about this. How do you take that work of research into that you you take it into the commercial setting and make it a reality? Can you give us a little bit of an example, something that maybe in your group, a little bit more in detail, and tell us a little bit about the hurdles and how you transitioned to make it, to where that became a reality?
Yeah, and like I say, I think a lot of this is down to luck, chance, whatever you want to call it. You've got papers, you've got the research, you've got the students trained and things like that. But when academics go to industry, I think they instantly think, well, what they after, they want money, don't they, and things like that. And I think it's this sort of time delay between saying, look, we've got this nice little box here that can do it, but say, well, we don't need a box, we need a really big machine to do it. And the example I'm going to give is about the hydroxy radical process, which is basically where we combine UV, hydrogen peroxide, and ozone in a continuous process. And it's a very water-free, well, it's not water-free, but it's very minimal amount of water, so good for dry ingredients, good for all kinds of products. And I think what really happened, we had this transitional champion. His name was Paul Moyer. He was the candy apple man. And the good thing about him, he had this sort of grasp on academic fundamentals, but he also had this industry perspective. And it's quite interesting. We would go around California and basically then just go into these offices of these big companies. And we did an experiment once where I said, I'm from the University of Guelph. Can I see your quality manager or and I just got this not available. Paul Moyer went in and they said, oh, yeah, sure, come right away. And I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's the charisma. I don't know if it's because industry people connect together. He is a farmer, which again is quite good if you're in the fresh produce game. But I always say you need this transitional champion. It's not angels or consultants. It's somebody who's really got something in the game, and also this bridging. And that opens a lot of doors, because once you've got this transitional champion, I call it, they go to feed mills and say, oh, could you do this? And they can then give me a connection to do trials and things like that. So in a lot of ways, I'll say it's synergistic. I think that's like the term we like to use, isn't it? Is that academics and industry coming together in a common cause is much more than the separate parts. And certainly I've mentioned it to him, saying, if it wasn't for that candy apple outbreak, I think I would be still sitting on this technology, probably doing something else. So it's having those transitional, but I know everyone's got their own case. Some faculty will open their own businesses and they'll do very well, and some people will patent things and do this. But in my instance, that was really the key point, getting that person. I don't know how you find these people. I think, but maybe they find you. Who knows?
Yeah, it is a challenge to find those type of people, and that reminded me a lot. I mean, when I did my PhD at Purdue University, I did work with ozone to sterilize grain surfaces from insects and kill insects and sterilize it from mycotoxins and mold. And it was a great applied research project. But when I had to do my preliminary exams, I had to come up with a research project, and it was using hydrogen peroxide. That was my proposition for the same same
All
purpose
right.
on
Small
grain
world.
and co-products. I mean, I never actually did any research on that during the time, but I had to defend it and did a lot of work on that. So sometimes my point is that you do something and that triggers other things that might come later, like you said. I mean, maybe that idea stays there, but it could help later the industry or another academic research project on that. So
Well, Carlos, did it ever get commercialized? Or
the ozone, yes, the ozone it is commercialized, and it is very interesting because I did this, almost 20 years ago. But it comes and goes in a way. There's always people that come back as like, "Hey, I'm starting my ozone generator business, and it's more in the food side." But it said, "Hey, I have an idea to apply to grain," so they look at me, and we try to help them a little bit, and then it kind of goes away, and then it comes back. It just depends a lot what's going on, and the grain industry per se is very dynamic because it depends a lot on what's going on around the world politically, and also that affects price, and then also on what's going on with the weather in terms of how it's growing and things like that. And I say those two because if the prices are good, then the companies have more money to invest for research projects and to solve issues. And on the weather side, it affects the quality. I mean, so that triggers the waves of using ozone. And yes, there's this company that used to do ozone generators for the potato and onion industry, and then they say, let's do it in grain, and we did it. We proved it. We developed some new prototypes of how to treat it, and the company got sold by a big grain player in the world, and they use it for their own purposes. And others have come, maybe not in the same way, but it did work out. And I that kind of shaped my career a little bit in a way. Not that I'm doing ozone stuff anymore, but going to the grain quality management, non-chemical alternatives for grain storage, and those type of things that have shaped that. So yeah, but I had a great advisor, Dr. Dirk Meyer, who is now at Iowa State University, who was a great mentor to bring that gap between, like you said, research from an academic perspective and from the industry. And I learned that, and that shaped my career overall. So
yeah, for experience. Yeah.
yeah, I know this is your podcast, but thank you for asking that. I always like to share that, and I think both of us from the academic perspective appreciate those type of things and stories on that. So as we move along, we're coming a little bit toward the end of the podcast, but one last question that I think will be important. How do you say that will be the right approach for somebody in their career, thinking, hey, I have this wild idea, but I also have to align with industry. How can I set up, what would be the good guidance for somebody to just be sure to have a better transition? Because I see both sides of my colleagues, one that are very academic centric and some more industry aligned. And I might tend to be more in that industry aligned, but somebody to be able to go both ways.
Yeah, and I think this comes down to extension. Like in the US, they're really good at extension. The average, well, a special position. But more often than not, faculty here in Canada, when industry come knocking on the door, if they're not got a big project, they don't want to entertain them. And I always say the best way to do things is, and I've had some crazy people come to me. I won't say who because I probably will get into trouble. Always entertain people, and like I said, you just don't know where it leads. And the thing, you get a perspective from industry, because if you're going to work with industry, you've got to have that network. And the best way to get network is, yeah, meet people at conference for sure. But conferences, you meet thousands of people and forget them. But if you do a special project with them, even if it's a small one, producing very little money, very little, no publication, or a graduate student, they build. And once you build that sort of network, it gets much easier. And you're also good to get a perspective from industry, because I think academics have this sort of vision of industry as pots of money, gold, um, always willing, they've got so much money looking for a problem. But it's not like that at all. Basically, you've got to look at considerations. And there was an interesting example of this is that we had a researcher looking at bacteriophage control in feed, saying, oh, yes, we'll put salmonella phage in and it'll be good for flour and things like that. You talk to an industry person saying there's no way that's ever going to be viable. So you've got to make it realistic. So my advice to anybody who really wants to click with industry is be very open to, receptive to sort of people consulting you. And even when doing media, somebody calls you up and says, you're going to be on the radio in 10 minutes talking about nuts and salmonella. Always do that, because it's amazing the power that people listen to you on the radio or see you on TV or see you in print. They don't care about peer-reviewed papers. That's the way to get industry engagement.
No, that's great advice, and I do agree with that with 100%. I mean, exposure, good marketing and communications, because I think one communicates what you do, the other one sells yourself. So that's great advice.
It's time for our famous three.
Wisenetics turns podcast airtime into brand authority. We don't sell ads, we elevate voices. Curious how far your voice can go to become a reference in the industry and attract more leads? Scan the QR code and discover how we can turn your expertise into unmatched brand authority. Let's transform expertise into influence, starting now.
So we're coming to the end of the podcast, but before we leave, do you have any particular book or resources that you will recommend to any young professional in the academic world, even in industry, to be able to understand everything on the steps and everything a little bit what we talk? I know that it's kind of hard to have a specific book on that, or maybe something from outside your area of expertise that can help somebody understand this better or guide them.
Well, I think the last novel I ever read was something like Jaws, and I think that was back in 1980s. But it's the way it is. But in terms of resource, we developed this with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, FAO, and we developed this food safety tool, which was based on the Codex. So in the food safety field, industry, government, and academia, if you ask them before, saying, well, go to read the Codex Alimentarius, they'll say, what's that? Where is it? And when you read it, it's very bland. But we did this food safety toolbox, and it basically breaks down the Codex, and it's you can read all the things. And the reason why I recommend that for food safety professionals, this is the foundation of what all regulations are based on. And the thing is, regulators try to interpret the sort of codex and usually do a bad job at it. But you go to the base, because that base tells you everything you need to know, even how to graze cattle and things like that. So I would recommend the FAO. It's free online, and you can just go to the food safety tool.
Great. No, that's great advice. I'm very aware with the codex. I have used it, but never actually seen the tool. So I also will take that. And for our audience, please share the video if you learned something new today. So to finalize, a little bit of advice for young professionals. What would you say will be, from your academic perspective and working there as a professor at University of Guelph, what sets aside successful professionals in the animal, in the agriculture, food science from those who are not? I mean, I know we have talked a lot about those things, but in your opinion, in a short answer, what will that be?
So really, the thing you look for is people who take the opportunity and do maximum at it. In my sort of university PhD days, I went to this taekwondo class, martial arts, and I was useless at it. I'm not a fighter, but the instructor said something that really hung on me. I don't know why he did, but he said, anything you do 100%. And I think that I've taken that through everything. So, whether I'm doing an interview, whether I'm doing a research, or whether I'm working on a project, you always give it 100%. And I notice some students do give it 100%, and that differentiates them from others. And the others don't take the opportunity, or the kind of slack off. They need to be told what to do all the time, and once you turn your back, they've gone. So I think that's where it is. Even at the minor task, you always give 100% of your effort, and those sort of people get on in life. And I won't say, in my own group, I have a very big spectrum of that. I won't say which one's which, but certainly any opportunity you take, if you do something, always do it 100%. Never do it half-hearted. That's my advice.
Thank you. No, that I think that's great advice. I think people will definitely appreciate that. So, Dr. Warriner, thank you very much for participating today in the Feed Science Podcast. This concludes another episode of the Feed Science Podcast brought to you by Wisenetics. Thank you today for joining us, also for our audience. And please don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review, comment. Your feedback is always very valuable to us. Until next time, this is Carlos Campabadal from the Feed Science Podcast signing off. Thank you very much.